Hey there folks, this is Ian. I am an artist at Pinghua, and today we're going to be using Krita to color comics. This is an alternate method of coloring comics. The basic method I've covered in the previous video. This one is going to be using adjustment layers and clipping groups. It's a little bit different, it's a little more painterly at times, and it can allow you to adjust the overall tone of the image. We're using the same flats that we used in the last one, so we have this image here. We're going to go over to the layers panel and we're going to hit Control G to place it into a clipping group. Now it's in a separate group. You notice that all of the flat information has disappeared. That's because inherited alpha is still checked, but it is inside a clipping group, so there's no data coming from the panels layer to affect it. So we got to turn that off and turn it on in the clipping group folder itself. Now, once we have the flats in this separate layer, we're going to make a new layer over top of it. We're going to double click it to rename it, and we're going to call it Hue. We're going to use this to affect the overall color hue on the image because these flats were done for kind of neutral lighting, but I want this to be a night scene, as you can tell by the background. So we're going to affect it here. To do that, we're going to change the layer mode. Up at the top where it says normal, we're going to click this drop down, and we're going to bring a hard light mode. If this is not visible, go down to these bottom categories. You can click on these different categories. Under lighten, you have some options here, and hard light is one of those options. Check that if it's not visible here. Change to hard light. We're going to turn on inherited alpha, so we're only affecting the area of the flats, which is below it. I'm going to take a basic 5 size brush, but I'm going to increase the size. Then holding control, I'll select some of the blue out of the background. I'm going to push it a little more towards the gray, but still in this basic color family. And then I'm just going to paint over the entire image just to tone down those colors and tint them with that blue, so it feels a little more harmonized with the background colors. If this is too intense for you, you can always adjust the opacity here. I think 75% is probably about where I want it, and I can toggle that off and on to see. Now that I have the hue of the image set, I'm going to make another layer. And then I'm going to double click this and shades. Again, we're going to make this a hard light. We're going to go back over to our color selector, go to the palettes tab, and then top of the default palette, I'm going to take a 50% gray, and then I'm going to hit shift and backspace to fill the entire area. I'm going to click on inherited alpha, and now that I have this 50% gray, if I do darker grays or lighter grays on top of it, it's going to lighten or darken those areas to various degrees. I'm going to work this in with an airbrush. Size way down because you use a giant airbrush by default. I want some shadows in here. Brush those in. Change the size. Because I'm using the same basic tone, it should blend fairly well. If you ever want to blend back into this, say I make a mistake and I go over, I don't want to undo, I can just go back to a 50% gray and color over. Turn this to a normal mode. You can see I'm just actually shading on top of gray, like working on toned paper. But when we go to hard light, blends that down. Throw in some shadows here. And I can do the same thing with highlights. So if I want to lighten certain areas, use a lighter gray. That in. I have my major areas of light and shadow done, blend them together a little bit, and then I can go in and do more specular or stronger highlights, kind of right along where I was going to pieces light. To very strong specular. You can use that method to get a softer, more painterly style of shading on your comics. It's very simple to do, and as you notice, all of my flats are still untouched, so it's easy to make edits. And I can adjust these tones if I want on the fly. So say I don't want this hue this way, say I'm actually working against like a brighter background, I can change this hue, like say it's a foresty thing, get kind of a green tone, and a really big brush. I can tint everything green. Adjust that saturation down. So depending on the kind of light, the quality of light you want, if you want to mesh your characters with the background, a hue adjustment layer on hard light will help with that. And for quickly shading and adding highlights and shadows, a hard light adjustment layer on a 50% gray with light and dark grays can really help. So play around with that, see what works for you, and until next time, keep drawing.
Bingoa.